Okay, let's go over what's included in the box. Of course, we have the IEMs themselves. The cable has swappable connectors and comes with a 3.5 single-ended, 2.5 balanced, and a 4.4 balanced connector. Case is nice. It's a good size, so everything fits inside very nicely. It's also hard and it snaps closed, so it offers good protection. You also get a nice assortment of ear tips, including one of my favorites, Final Type E's, and you get a cleaning tool. So a very well-rounded package. All right, so let's go over the specifications, design, comfort, fit, and isolation. The Kinera Urd was released in March of 2022. It comes in at $650. It has kind of an interesting driver configuration. It uses 2 dynamic drivers for the bass, 1 balanced armature for the mids, and 2 electrostatic tweeters for the highs. The main body of the shell is 3D printed, and then a combination of blue and green resin paint is layered on top of one another to create this absolutely unique design. If you hold it in the light just right, you can actually see into the layers. I'm going to make sure I get some good B-roll of these shells because these are simply stunning, and I just don't know if this is going to do it justice. The cable is also quite nice. It's a 2-pin cable. And as I mentioned earlier, the cable is modular, so you can swap out the connectors. It gives you a 3.5 single-ended, 2.5 balanced, and a 4.4 balanced option. As for the cable itself, it's constructed using 6N OCC with silver-plated and gold wire. And also, just so you can get an idea of the size of the shell of the Urd, I have the OG SA6 here, and as you can see, the Urd is quite large. But it's actually very comfortable, and it's not really even that heavy. It does stick out a little more than what I'm used to, but that doesn't really bother me at all. As far as isolation, it's very good, so there is very little noise bleed. So it's beautifully designed, fits my ears great, it's comfortable, and offers very good isolation. But how does it sound? Let's talk about that next. Okay, let's talk about the overall sound first. Then we'll talk about the treble, mids, and bass in greater detail. And then finally, we'll get into the technicalities. It actually reminds me of my Nana 2.0s a little. And if you've watched some of my other reviews, you know I loved those. But unfortunately, I got upgrade-itis and I sold them. And now I really wish I hadn't, but I digress. The Urd, like the Nana 2.0s, has what I would describe as a fairly neutral but slightly warm presentation and a little extra mid-bass presence. There's also a little bump in the upper mids, and while I wouldn't consider it mid-forward tuning, it does seem to push vocals and some instruments a little bit closer than, say, the variations. And as for the treble, I would describe it as slightly relaxed, again, similar to the treble presentation of the Nana 2.0s. However, the Nana's treble definitely had more energy and more detail as well. So the overall tonality comes across to me as neutral and full-bodied with slightly relaxed treble. Okay, let's talk about the bass of the Urd. Remember, this has 2 dynamic drivers, and we all know that dynamic driver bass sounds different from BA bass because BA drivers are small and they typically lack in dynamics, slam, and impact, but they have good speed and control. Whereas a good dynamic driver actually displaces air, so the result is more dynamic or having a visceral effect. Of course, ideally, you want both speed and dynamics, but the reality is more times than not, you have to sacrifice one for the other. And personally, if I have to choose one attribute over the other, I'm going to opt for the impact rather than definition. And the thing is, while you may not be able to achieve the level of control and definition a BA driver can, you can get close enough with a dynamic driver so that you can pretty much get the best of both worlds. And that's exactly what the 2 dynamic drivers give you in the Urd. Lots of visceral impact with adequate control. There is also excellent extension all the way down into the sub-bass frequencies. And actually, there is a sub-bass emphasis, but it's very tastefully implemented. And as far as the transition from the mid-bass to the lower mids, they give you a little bit of warmth, but are careful to maintain good, clean separation from the mids into the bass without causing any muddiness or boominess or sounding bloated. And now moving into the mids, which are handled by a single balanced armature driver. Again, this is a little unusual because there are two dynamic drivers, and in most tribrid configurations, you have two of each driver, or two electrostat drivers, two BA drivers, and a single dynamic driver. But usually there's two balanced armatures handling the mids. So this is, again, kind of a interesting configuration. And I have to say, I didn't really know what to expect. I guess I was a little worried that the bass might overwhelm the mids, but the implementation is actually done really well, and it actually sounds great. As I mentioned before, in the bass section, there is no perceivable bass bleed into the mids. There is a bump in the upper mids that does push vocals and some instruments a little bit forward, but they're not in your face. There is still some forward depth that gives a sense of space between the listener and the vocalist or instruments. And speaking of vocals and instruments, the voices and instruments sound very natural, have really good realism, and its resolve and detail retrieval in the mids, while not the best I've heard at this price, are still very good and fall only slightly behind some of the best, like the SA6 Ultra and the original SA6 and the variations. That's why I have those out here right now. Okay, and now moving into the treble of the Urd. The treble is what I would consider relaxed and has an overall smooth presentation. Now, as far as treble detail retrieval, the Urd is not the most detailed or resolving that I've heard, especially when compared again to some of the other IEMs around this price range, again, like the original SA6 or SA6 Ultra, and even the variations. But those IEMs, the thing is, those are exceptional at this price. And honestly, the Urd doesn't really fall that far behind. It's still very, very good. Now, as far as air, which is basically the frequencies above 10K, it's good. Not great, but still definitely enough to allow the listener to experience that sense of atmosphere or openness with certain recordings. A couple of recordings that come to mind are Macy Gray's Stripped and also the Hoff Ensemble Acoustic project. Those are both great for testing that. I also use those recordings frequently for testing soundstage and imaging, layering, and instrument separation. So how are the technical capabilities of the Imperial Urd? Let's talk about soundstage first. I would say the soundstage of the Urd is about average, so it's not super wide, but I wouldn't categorize it as intimate either. It's wide enough to satisfy me. And in terms of instrument separation and layering, I would say the Urd is about average at this price and falls, again, behind both the OG SA6, SA6 Ultra, and variations. But here's the thing. When I'm listening to the Urd, if I'm not doing a direct side-by-side comparison with any of these IEMs, I don't feel like I'm missing anything. I still get a lot of enjoyment out of the Urd. And that may be different for you depending on what you're looking for. All I can do as a reviewer is just share my personal experience and opinions. If you want something with a really good technical performance, there are better options at this price. But if you're looking for something that sounds real and natural, the Urd might actually be for you. And I will tell you this, I get more satisfaction from the Urd's bass than I do the OG SA6 or the SA6 Ultra. And I guess the question is, how do I feel about the Urd generally, and how would I describe my experience? If I had to summarize my experience in one word, I would describe it as satisfying. And if I could use two words, I would say very satisfying. Because again, not only does it give you that impactful, visceral bass experience, It's also very natural sounding, and while it may not be the most technical IAM out there, it still has really good technicalities. Again, enough so that I don't feel like I'm missing anything, and the design, comfort, and build are excellent. And again, the shell design is absolutely stunning. So that concludes my review of the Kinera Imperial Urd. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. Please like this video, please share this video, and please click the subscribe button. I hope you guys have an awesome day.